Introduction. How an injury led me to irrationality and to the research described. Here, I have often been told that my perspective on the world is somewhat unconventional. Over the last 2 decades, this unique vantage point has allowed me to explore the hidden forces that truly drive our daily decisions, distinguishing them from the reasons we tell ourselves, often with great conviction, are the cause. Consider the perplexing nature of our choices. Why do we solemnly vow to adhere to a diet, only to watch that resolve evaporate the moment a dessert cart trundles past? Why do we find ourselves purchasing items we neither need nor truly want, simply because of a fleeting moment of excitement? Why does a headache persist after we take a 1-cent aspirin, yet vanish almost instantly if we take the exact same medication priced at 50 cents? By the time you reach the end of this book, you will understand the answers to these questions and many others that touch upon your personal life, your business decisions, and your broader understanding of society. Comprehending why a more expensive aspirin works better is not merely about pharmaceutical pricing. It has profound implications for the cost and efficacy of our entire health insurance system. Understanding the psychological weight of the 10 Commandments can help us see why honor codes might prevent corporate fraud. Grasping the mechanics of impulsive eating can shed light on why saving for retirement is such an arduous struggle. My objective is to help you fundamentally dismantle and reconstruct your understanding of human behavior. I intend to do this by walking you through a series of scientific experiments, findings, and anecdotes. Once you begin to see how systematic our mistakes are, how we repeat them with clockwork regularity, you may begin to navigate around them. But before we delve into the curious science of shopping, love, money, and procrastination, I must explain the origins of my unorthodox worldview. Tragically, my entry into this field began not with a moment of academic inspiration, but with a devastating accident. On a Friday afternoon that should have been like any other for an 18-year-old in Israel, my life was irrevocably altered in seconds. A magnesium flare, the type used to illuminate battlefields at night, exploded next to me. In an instant, 70% of my body was covered in third-degree burns. The next 3 years were spent swathed in bandages within the confines of a hospital. When I did emerge, I was encased in a tight synthetic suit and a mask that left me looking like a distorted comic book character. Unable to participate in the normal rhythms of society, I became an observer. I felt like a visitor from another planet, watching the daily routines of those around me with a detached curiosity. I began to question everything. Why did I prefer one person's company over another's? Why were medical routines designed for the convenience of the doctor rather than the comfort of the patient? What truly motivates us? During those long years in the hospital, I became intimately acquainted with pain. My daily existence revolved around a procedure known as the bath. Every day I was soaked in a disinfectant solution, after which the nurses would remove my bandages and scrape away the dead skin. When a person has intact skin, a disinfectant stings only mildly, and bandages peel off with ease. But when there is no skin, the sting is unbearable and the bandages fuse to the raw flesh. Removing them is an agony beyond description. I soon began to engage the nurses in conversation to understand their method. They operated on the theory that a quick, vigorous rip of the bandage was superior. They believed that a sharp, intense spike of pain was better for the patient than a slow, prolonged removal. They also believed there was no difference between starting at the most painful part of the body or the least painful. As the person actually enduring the procedure, I disagreed vehemently. Their theory failed to account for the dread of anticipation, the difficulty of managing fluctuating waves of pain, or the psychological relief of knowing the worst was over. Yet, in my helpless state, my objections were overruled. When I finally left the hospital for a prolonged period, I enrolled at Tel Aviv University. In my first semester, a class on the physiology of the brain, taught by Professor Hanan Frank, changed the trajectory of my life. Professor Frank's attitude toward scientific inquiry was liberating. When I questioned his interpretations, he did not dismiss me. Instead, he challenged me to propose an empirical test to prove my alternative theory. This idea, that science is a democratic endeavor where any theory can be valid if supported by empirical evidence, opened a new world to me. I threw myself into research. I proposed a theory regarding epilepsy and, with the help of a dedicated friend who acted as my hands in the lab, I operated on rats to test it. My theory turned out to be wrong, but the failure did not matter. The realization that I could use the tools of science to uncover the truth about how things work was intoxicating. I turned my focus immediately to the subject that had dominated my life: pain. I wanted to know if the nurses were right. Was it truly better to rip the bandages off quickly? I conducted a series of laboratory experiments using heat, cold, pressure, and sound to induce pain in volunteers. The results were clear and contradictory to the standard medical practice. People suffer less when pain is delivered at a lower intensity over a longer duration than when it is high intensity and short duration. The nurses, despite their kindness and years of experience, were wrong. They were victims of inherent biases in their perception of their patient's pain, biases that no amount of experience had corrected. This discovery left a deep impression on me. If seasoned professionals could so fundamentally misunderstand the reality of the people they cared for, perhaps we all misunderstand the consequences of our behaviors. I decided to expand my research from the physiology of pain to the broader examination of human decision-making and the repeated mistakes we make. This journey into the realm of our collective irrationality is the subject of this book. The discipline I work within is called behavioral economics. It is a field that bridges psychology and economics, exploring not just how we behave, but the decision-making processes behind those behaviors. To understand why this field is necessary, we must look at the standard view of human nature. As Shakespeare wrote in Hamlet, "What a piece of work is a man, how noble in reason, how infinite in faculty." This sentiment that humans are rational, logical agents capable of perfect reasoning is the bedrock of traditional economics. From the perspective of a standard economist, we are all rational actors. We compute the value of our options and follow the best path. If we make a mistake, market forces correct us. But this model is flawed. We are not noble computers, we are irrational. Moreover, our irrationality is not random, it is systematic and predictable. We make the same mistakes over and over again. This book is an attempt to modify that standard economic view, moving it away from naive psychology and toward a more accurate understanding of human nature. Each chapter describes experiments that serve as microscopes, slowing down human behavior so we can isolate and examine the forces at play. These experiments are not merely academic exercises, they are illustrations of general principles that apply to your life, your business, and your relationships. I invite you to pause after each chapter, consider how the principles revealed might apply to your own existence. Think about how recognizing these patterns of predictable irrationality can help you make better decisions. That is where the true adventure lies. Chapter 1. The Truth About Relativity. Why Everything is Relative, Even When It Shouldn't Be. One afternoon, while I was navigating the web for professional purposes, I assure you it was work-related, I encountered a peculiar advertisement on the website of The Economist. The magazine was offering subscriptions, and the breakdown of choices gave me pause. The first option was an internet-only subscription for $59. That seemed fair. The second option was a print-only subscription for $125. A bit steep, but not unheard of. It was the third option that caused me to do a double take, a bundled subscription for both the print edition and the internet access, also for $125. I read it again. The print-only version and the comprehensive package were listed at the exact same price. Who in their right mind would choose the print-only option when they could get the digital access included for free? It seemed like a typographical error, but knowing the clever nature of the people at The Economist, I suspected something more intentional. They were manipulating me. They knew that if I looked at the $59 option and the $125 combo, I might struggle to weigh the value. But by adding a useless option, the print-only subscription at the same high price, they made the combo deal look like a steal. They were counting on the fact that humans rarely make decisions in a vacuum. We don't have an internal meter that tells us the absolute value of things. Instead, we look at the relative advantage of one thing over another. In this scenario, I might not have known if the digital subscription was truly worth $59, but I certainly knew that the print and digital combo was infinitely better than the print-only option. By comparison, the combo deal felt like I was getting something for nothing. When I later tested this on a group of students at MIT's Sloan School of Management, the results were staggering. When all three options were present, the vast majority chose the combo deal. But when I removed the decoy, the print-only option that nobody wanted, the preference flipped.
Without the decoy to make the combo look superior, most students opted for the cheaper, digital-only subscription. The mere presence of the inferior option had manipulated them into spending more money. This phenomenon brings us to a fundamental truth about human nature. We are wired to compare. We don't know what kind of house we want until we see a slightly better one next door. We don't know what kind of life we want until we see a friend living a version of it that seems just out of reach. We are like pilots landing in the dark. We need runway lights on either side to guide us to the right spot. This reliance on relativity helps us make decisions in a complex world, but it also makes us predictably irrational. Consider the layout of items in a store or a menu. A restaurant consultant named Greg Rapp discovered that high-priced entrees often serve a hidden purpose. They aren't necessarily there to be sold. They are there to make the second most expensive dish look reasonable by comparison. If a restaurant lists a steak for $41, you might hesitate. But if there is another option on the menu for nearly double that price, the $41 steak suddenly seems like a prudent choice. We avoid the most expensive item, but we also avoid the cheapest, landing comfortably in the middle, exactly where the restaurateur wants us. To understand this mechanics of the mind, imagine three options. You are looking at two choices, A and B, which are different but roughly equal in value, like a weekend in Paris versus a weekend in Rome. It is a hard choice. Paris has the Louvre, Rome has the Colosseum. How do you decide? Now, imagine a third option is introduced, which we will call A minus A. This is a version of option A that is slightly inferior. For instance, a weekend in Rome without the complimentary breakfast. Suddenly the comparison is no longer difficult. Rome with breakfast is clearly superior to Rome without breakfast. And because Rome with breakfast is now the winner of that small comparison, it glows with a halo of superiority that makes it look better than Paris too. The decoy has done its work, steering you toward the target the marketer intended. I decided to test this decoy effect in the realm of physical attraction. I took photographs of undergraduate students and asked their peers to rate them. Then, using digital editing software, I created slightly distorted versions of some of the faces, making a nose a bit wider or an eye slightly asymmetric. I then presented students with a choice: a normal photo of person A, a normal photo of person B, and the slightly distorted version of person A. Consistently, the presence of the distorted A made the normal A appear more attractive than person B. The ugly twin didn't just look ugly, it made the normal twin look stunning. This principle has amusing, if slightly Machiavellian, implications for your social life. If you are single and heading to a bar hoping to meet someone, you might consider bringing along a decoy, a friend who looks similar to you but is slightly less attractive. The comparison will work in your favor. Of course, this also means that if a friend who looks just like you but is slightly more attractive invites you out, you might want to question their motives. However, relativity is not just a quirky feature of shopping or dating. It is a source of profound misery. We live in a world where we are constantly comparing our lot with others. It is the reason why a man earning a healthy salary can feel poor if his brother-in-law earns slightly more. I once spoke with an executive who told me about an employee who complained bitterly about his salary. The young man was earning $300,000 a year, a fortune by most standards, but he was miserable because a colleague at the next desk was earning $310,000. The absolute amount of money didn't matter. The relative position did. This endless cycle of comparison drives the escalating CEO salaries we see today. When executive compensations were made public in an effort to shame companies into restraint, it backfired. CEOs didn't feel shame, they felt envy. They looked at the lists, saw who was making more and demanded raises to match their peers. The result was a skyrocketing of pay that detached completely from the average worker's reality. The problem with relativity is that it is local. We compare ourselves to our immediate surroundings. A few years ago, I heard a story about a doctor who graduated from Harvard with dreams of curing cancer. He was happy and fulfilled until he attended a reunion and realized his friends who had gone into finance were earning 10 times his salary. Suddenly, his life's work felt inadequate, not because it lacked meaning, but because it lacked the relative financial weight of his peers' careers. He eventually left medicine for Wall Street, chasing a feeling of equity rather than his original dream. We also see this irrationality in how we value our time.
If you were buying a $25 pen and found out it was $7 cheaper at a store 15 minutes away, you would likely make the trip. You would walk 15 minutes to save $7. But if you were buying a suit for $455 and found out it was $7 cheaper, 15 minutes away, most people would say it wasn't worth the effort. In both cases, the trade-off is identical: 15 minutes of your life for $7. But because the $7 seems insignificant relative to the price of the suit, we throw it away. We are penny-wise and pound-foolish not because we lack logic, but because our logic is warped by the context. Is there a way out? It is difficult, but we can try to control the circles we move in. If you are at a gathering where everyone is bragging about their bonuses, you can walk away and talk to someone else. You can choose not to browse real estate listings that are wildly out of your budget. We can attempt to widen our perspective to look at a purchase not just in comparison to the item next to it, but in terms of what else that money could buy in our lives. James Hong, the co-founder of the website Hot or Not, once told me how he managed this. He sold his Porsche Boxster and bought a Toyota Prius. He realized that owning the Boxster just made him want a 911, and he knew that if he had the 911, he would only want a Ferrari. By stepping out of that loop of relativity, he found a way to be satisfied. The more we have, the more we want. The only way to win is to break the cycle. Chapter 2. The Fallacy of Supply and Demand. Why the price of pearls and everything else is up in the air. At the onset of World War II, an Italian diamond dealer named James Ariely fled Europe for Cuba. He found a new livelihood there, filling the American Army's demand for waterproof watches. When the war ended, however, the business dried up, leaving him with thousands of Swiss watches and no buyers. The Japanese, meanwhile, needed watches but had no money. What they did have were pearls. Ariely taught his son Salvador to barter watches for pearls, and soon the business blossomed. Salvador Ariely became the Pearl King. In 1973, Salvador's yacht was moored in Saint-Tropez when a dashing young Frenchman named Jean-Claude Brouillet stepped aboard. Brouillet had recently sold his air freight business and bought an atoll in French Polynesia, a blue lagoon teeming with black-lipped oysters. These oysters produced black pearls, gunmetal gray with a greenish sheen. At the time, there was no market for them. They were unknown, and when Ariely tried to sell an early harvest, he failed to sell a single one. The world did not want black pearls, but Ariely did not give up. He waited a year until the pearls were of better quality, and then he executed a masterstroke of psychological manipulation. He went to his friend Harry Winston, the legendary gemstone dealer, and had him display the black pearls in the window of his Fifth Avenue store with an outrageously high price tag. Simultaneously, Ariely commissioned full-page advertisements in the glossiest magazines, positioning the pearls next to diamonds, rubies, and emeralds. Suddenly, the pearls were not just grey metallic spheres, they were treasures. The high price tag had signaled their value. Ariely had anchored the pearls to the finest gems in the world, and from that moment on, the prices followed the anchor. This story illustrates a fundamental peculiarity of human behavior. In many ways, we are like goslings. The naturalist Konrad Lorenz discovered that shortly after hatching, goslings attach themselves to the first moving object they see, usually their mother. Lorenz showed that if he was the first thing they saw, they would follow him faithfully, ignoring their biological mother. This phenomenon is called imprinting. We humans also imprint, not on mothers, hopefully, but on initial prices. When we encounter a new product, the first price we see becomes an anchor. This anchor shapes not only what we are willing to pay for that product at that moment, but also what we are willing to pay for related products in the future. We see this in the real estate market. When people move from a low-cost area like Lubbock, Texas, to a high-cost area like Pittsburgh, they are anchored to the lower prices. They see a house for $300,000 and wince because their anchor is $150,000. They often end up squeezing their families into smaller homes to match their anchor. Conversely, people moving from Los Angeles to Pittsburgh see the same $300,000 house as a bargain because their anchor is $800,000. They don't save the money. They often buy a mansion they don't need, simply because the price feels low relative to their anchor. But how arbitrary is this anchor? To find out, my colleagues and I conducted an experiment with students at MIT's Sloan School of Management. We asked them to write down the last 2 digits of their social security numbers, SSN, as if they were a price. E.g., if the digits were 44, the price was $44. We then asked them if they would pay that amount for a series of items, including a bottle of rare wine, a trackball, and a box of Belgian chocolates. Finally, we asked them to bid the maximum amount they would actually pay for each item in an auction. The results were stunning. The students with the highest ending SSN digits, 8099 bid, on average, 216 to 346% more than those with the lowest ending digits, 00 to 19. The students knew their SSN was random and irrelevant to the value of the wine, yet the mere act of writing down that number established an anchor that dragged their subsequent judgments toward it. This suggests a phenomenon called arbitrary coherence. The initial price is arbitrary, it could be determined by a random number, but once established, it shapes all future prices in a coherent manner. This principle challenges the standard economic picture of supply and demand. In the standard view, demand is an independent force based on our preferences. But if our preferences can be manipulated by a random number or a price tag in a window, then demand is not as autonomous as we think. It suggests that market prices are not necessarily reflections of true utility, but are often just reflections of history, of the first price that happened to be attached to an item. Consider Starbucks. When Howard Schultz started the company, he faced a problem: how to convince people who were used to paying 50 cents for coffee at Dunkin' Donuts to pay $2.50. If he had simply sold coffee in a normal cup in a normal shop, the 50-cent anchor would have killed him. People would have said, "This is expensive coffee." So Schultz changed the context. He didn't sell coffee, he sold the Starbucks experience. He created a store that smelled of roasted beans, sold fancy pastries, and used exotic names like macchiato and frappuccino. He changed the sizes from small, medium, large to short, tall, grand, venti. By doing so, he broke the link to the old anchor. Starbucks didn't feel like a coffee shop. It felt like a different experience entirely, one that required a new anchor. We accepted the new price because we didn't compare it to the old 50-cent cup. We accepted it as a new standard. This malleability of value brings us to Mark Twain and the Adventures of Tom Sawyer. When Tom is punished by being made to whitewash a fence, he creates the impression that the work is a privilege. By feigning enjoyment, he convinces his friends that whitewashing is a rare skill, something to be coveted. Soon his friends are paying him, in marbles, firecrackers, and dead rats, for the privilege of doing his work. Twain concludes that work consists of whatever a body is obliged to do, and play consists of whatever a body is not obliged to do. This insight runs deep. If we are paid to do something, we view it as work. If we pay to do it, we view it as play. In one of my own experiments, I read poetry from Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass to students. Half the students were asked if they would be willing to pay $10 to hear me recite poetry. The other half were asked if they would be willing to listen to me recite poetry if I paid them $10. Later, I told both groups the reading was actually free. The group I had asked to pay $10 was thrilled. They were getting a valuable experience for free. The group I had offered to pay $10 was insulted. They thought the reading must be so painful that I had to pay people to endure it, and now I was asking them to do it for nothing? The reading was the same. The poetry was the same. But the initial question had set an anchor. One group saw it as a valuable service, the other as a painful chore. The implication is that our lives are navigated by these arbitrary anchors. We are not the cool, rational calculators that economic theory suggests. We are creatures of habit, following the path of the first breadcrumb dropped before us. We do not choose, we imprint. And once we imprint, we follow the flock, assuming that the price we pay is the price that should be paid, never realizing that the validity of that price is nothing more than an illusion of our own making. Chapter 3. The cost of zero cost. Why we often pay too much when we pay nothing. Everything you buy has a downside. When you purchase a piece of furniture, you lose the money you paid for it, and you also risk the possibility that the sofa will be uncomfortable or that the table will wobble. When you buy a car, you accept the financial burden and the potential for mechanical failure. This creates a psychological barrier. Every transaction requires a calculation of cost versus benefit. But there is one price that bypasses this logic entirely: zero. Zero is not merely a price, it is an emotional hot button. It is a source of irrational excitement. When something is free, we forget the downside. Free gives us such an emotional charge that we perceive what is being offered as immensely more valuable than it really is. Why? Because humans are intrinsically afraid of loss. The real allure of free is tied to this fear. There is no visible possibility of loss when we choose a free item. If you choose the item that is not free, there is a risk of having made a poor trade. But with a free item, the risk seems to vanish. To demonstrate this, I conducted an experiment with chocolate. I set up a table in a large public building and offered 2 types of chocolates to passers-by: a Lindt truffle, a high-quality Swiss confection that typically costs around 50 cents, and a Hershey's Kiss, a standard machine-made chocolate worth significantly less. In the first scenario, I priced the Lindt truffle at 15 cents, a steeply discounted price for such a luxury, and the Hershey's Kiss at 1 cent. The customers behaved with perfect economic rationality. They compared the quality and the price. The truffle was clearly the better deal, offering high value for a small cost. Consequently, 73% of the customers chose the truffle, while only 27% chose the Kiss. They acted as any economist would predict. They maximized their utility. Then I made a small adjustment. I lowered the price of both chocolates by exactly 1 cent. The Lindt truffle became 14 cents, and the Hershey's Kiss became free. In terms of pure logic, nothing had changed relative to each other. The price difference between the 2 chocolates was still exactly 14 cents. If you were willing to pay the extra 14 cents for the superior taste of the truffle before, you should still be willing to pay it now. The trade-off remained identical, but the behavior of the customers flipped completely. When the Kiss became free, 69% of the people chose it, and the share of people choosing the truffle collapsed from 73% to 31%. The moment the Kiss cost nothing, it became irresistible. The students were no longer comparing the flavor of the truffle against its price. They were simply grabbing the free option because it felt safe, easy, and victorious. They gave up a clearly superior product at a bargain price for a mediocre product simply because the mediocre one was free. This zero price effect is not limited to cheap chocolates. It influences decisions on a massive scale. Consider the case of Amazon.com. Some years ago, Amazon introduced a promotion offering free shipping for orders over a certain amount. The logic was simple. If a customer had $16 worth of books in their cart, they would likely add another book to reach the $25 threshold for free shipping. The strategy worked brilliantly. Sales skyrocketed in every country where the promotion was launched, except for one. In France, sales remained flat. Was the French consumer more rational? Were they immune to the allure of zero? Not quite. Amazon investigated and found that the French division had made a slight alteration to the offer. Instead of free shipping, they reduced the shipping cost to a mere 1 franc, roughly 20 cents. From a strictly economic standpoint, 20 cents is almost zero. It is a negligible cost, but it is not zero. Because the shipping wasn't free, the French customers didn't feel that rush of irrational excitement. They didn't add extra books to their carts. The moment Amazon France changed the promotion to strictly free, the French customers responded exactly like everyone else in the world, and sales surged. The difference between 20 cents and zero was monumental. This psychological quirk explains why we wait in line for hours to get a free sample of ice cream that would cost us less than $1 to buy. We value our time at zero when we are chasing something for free. It explains why we pick up useless swag at conferences, stress balls, keychains, cheap tote bags that we would never dream of paying for. We bring them home, clutter our lives, and eventually throw them away. The cost of taking them seems to be nothing, but the cost of ownership, as we will see, is real. Understanding the power of zero is crucial because it often leads us to make poor decisions. We buy a car we don't really like because it comes with free oil changes for a year. We sign up for a credit card with high interest rates because it offers free airline miles. We are pulled into transactions we should avoid simply because one component of the deal has been labeled with that magic word. If you want to sell a product, making a part of it free is a powerful tool. But if you want to be a rational consumer, you must be vigilant. You must ask yourself, if this item were not free, but cost even a single penny, would I still want it? If the answer is no, then the price of zero is too high. Appendix, Chapter 3. We often wonder if the zero effect applies only to cheap items like chocolate or shipping. Would it apply to bigger decisions? In subsequent experiments, we found that the allure of free holds true even when the stakes are higher. Whether we are trading small amounts of money or making choices about cars and vacations, the distinction between a very low price and zero remains a psychological chasm. The zero price is a category of its own. Chapter 4. The Cost of Social Norms. Why we are happy to do things, but not when we are paid to do them. Imagine, for a moment, that you have just finished a sumptuous Thanksgiving dinner at your mother-in-law's house. The turkey was roasted to golden perfection, the stuffing was savory, and the conversation flowed with a warmth that is rare in family gatherings. As you push back from the table, feeling satisfied and grateful, you decide to express your appreciation in the most tangible way you know. You pull out your checkbook, uncap your pen, and say, "Mom, that was truly magnificent. I'd like to give you $300 for the meal." You can imagine the silence that would descend upon the room. The smile would vanish from your mother-in-law's face. Your spouse would stare at you in horror. The glass of wine in your sister-in-law's hand would pause midway to her lips. In an instant, you have shattered the evening. You have introduced a market transaction into a social gathering, and the result is not gratitude, but offense. Why does this happen? The answer lies in the fact that we live simultaneously in two different worlds, governed by two distinct sets of rules. One world is defined by social norms. In this realm, exchanges are warm and fuzzy. We do favors for neighbors, we open doors for strangers, and we cook dinner for our families. These actions are not instant trade-offs. They are part of a long-term fabric of reciprocity and connection. We do not expect immediate payment. In fact, the very idea of payment is repugnant. The other world is governed by market norms. Here, the exchanges are sharp and clear. Wages, prices, rents, and interest rates rule this domain. You get what you pay for. It is not necessarily cold or evil. It is efficient. When you buy a suit or pay a lawyer, you are engaging in a market interaction. You expect professional service and you expect to pay for it. The trouble arises when these two worlds collide. As the Thanksgiving example illustrates, introducing market norms into a social exchange violates the social code and causes relational damage that is difficult to repair. To understand how these norms function and malfunction when they intersect, my colleagues and I designed an experiment involving a simple, monotonous task. We asked participants to sit at a computer and drag a circle from one side of the screen to a square on the other side. They were to do this as many times as they could in 5 minutes. We divided the participants into 3 groups. The first group was firmly placed in the world of market norms. We offered them $5 to perform the task. The second group was also in the market world, but we offered them a much smaller sum, about 50 cents. The third group was approached entirely through social norms. We offered them no money at all. We simply asked them to participate as a favor to us. Standard economic theory would predict that the $5 group would work the hardest, the 50-cent group would work less hard, and the zero payment group would do almost nothing. After all, people work for money, right? The results contradicted this logic completely. The group paid $5, dragged an average of 159 circles. The group paid 50 cents, dragged an average of 101 circles. This makes sense. Less money, less effort. But the group that was paid nothing, they dragged an average of 168 circles, more than the group paid $5. When money was mentioned, the participants analyzed the task through market norms. Is this worth my time for 50 cents? The answer was clearly no, so they put in little effort. But when no money was mentioned, the participants viewed the task through social norms. I'm helping a researcher, I should do a good job. They worked harder for free than they did for a fair wage. This phenomenon explains why we are often happy to do things for free that we would refuse to do for a small amount of money. Consider the case of the AARP, the Organization for Retirees. Some years ago, they approached a group of lawyers and asked if they would offer their services to needy retirees for a discounted rate of about $30 an hour. The lawyers refused. The price was too low. It felt like a bad market transaction. Then the program manager had a brilliant idea. He asked the lawyers if they would offer their services for free. Overwhelmingly, the lawyers agreed. When the $30 was on the table, the lawyers viewed the request as a market exchange, and $30 was an insult. When the money was removed, the request became a social exchange, an act of charity and civic duty, and the lawyers were happy to contribute their time. The danger of mixing these norms is that once market norms are introduced, they are incredibly difficult to displace. A famous study conducted at a daycare center in Israel illustrates this perfectly. The daycare faced a common problem, parents arriving late to pick up their children. This forced the teachers to stay after hours, causing frustration and expense. To solve this, the daycare decided to introduce a fine for late pickups. The logic was sound. If you penalize people financially, they will stop the undesirable behavior. But when the fine was implemented, the number of late pickups didn't go down. It went up. Why? Before the fine, the parents felt guilty about being late. The social contract dictated that they should not inconvenience the teachers, but once the fine was introduced, the situation shifted to market norms.
The parents began to view the late fee as a price. They were no longer imposing on a teacher, they were buying extra time. The guilt evaporated. They calculated that the extra time was worth the price of the fine, so they happily paid it and arrived late. The story gets worse. After a few weeks, the daycare realized the plan had failed and removed the fine, hoping to return to the old system. But the parents did not revert to their previous behavior. They continued to arrive late. The social norm of guilt and obligation had been eroded by the market norm, and once broken, it could not be easily restored. The parents now viewed the situation as a market transaction with a price of zero, a free perk. This fragility of social norms has profound implications for our personal lives. In the world of dating, for instance, we navigate a delicate dance of social exchange. We pay for dinner, we buy gifts, we open doors. But if you were to mention the price of these gestures, if you were to mention the cost of the meal while leaning in for a kiss, you would instantly shift the frame from romance to commerce, likely ending the relationship on the spot. It also affects the business world. Companies often try to cultivate social norms with their employees, using phrases like, "we are a family." They want the loyalty and the going the extra mile attitude that comes with social relationships. And this works, until the company invokes a market norm, like refusing a sick day or docking pay for a minor error. In that moment, the illusion is shattered. Employees realize they are not family. They are contractors. And they return to the market mentality. I will do exactly what you pay me for, and no more. The lesson is that we must be careful. Social norms are powerful motivators. They can drive people to pull all-nighters for an open-source project, to help a friend move a couch, or to volunteer for a cause. But they are also fragile. You cannot mix them with market norms without risking the relationship. You can't pay your mother-in-law for Thanksgiving dinner, and you can't expect an employee to work with the passion of a volunteer if you treat them like a line item on a spreadsheet. We must recognize which world we are operating in and respect the boundaries that keep our social fabric intact. Chapter 5. The Influence of Arousal. Why hot is much hotter than we realize. In the folklore of literature, few transformations are as chilling as that of Dr. Jekyll into Mr. Hyde. We are fascinated by the idea that a mild-mannered, respectable man can harbor a beast within him, a creature of impulse, rage, and lust that emerges only when the conditions are right. We tell ourselves this is fiction. We believe that we know who we are. We believe that our values, our preferences, and our moral compass are constant. But what if they aren't? What if we all harbor a Mr. Hyde waiting for the heat of the moment to take control? My colleague George Lowenstein, a professor of economics and psychology at Carnegie Mellon, had been studying this phenomenon for years. He called it the hot-cold empathy gap. The idea is that when we are in a cold, rational state, we cannot truly appreciate the force of our desires when we are in a hot, aroused state. We might resolve to keep our cool during a traffic jam, but when the car in front of us cuts us off, rationality evaporates and rage takes the wheel. We might swear to practice safe sex, but when passion overtakes us, that promise feels like a distant memory from a different life. To test the true magnitude of this gap, George and I decided to conduct an experiment. We needed to observe people in both a cold, rational state and a hot, aroused state. And to do that, we needed to study one of the most powerful biological drives we possess: sexual arousal. We chose for our subjects the cream of the crop, male undergraduate students from the University of California, Berkeley. These were bright, disciplined young men, the kind you would expect to be in control of their faculties. Our challenge was to question them first in a standard, neutral setting, and then again while they were in a state of high sexual arousal. Achieving this in a scientific setting required some creativity and a strong institutional review board. We couldn't exactly put them in a room with a partner. Instead, we relied on self-stimulation. We asked the students to find a private place, look at pornographic images on a computer, and masturbate. We instructed them to answer a series of questions only when their arousal had reached at least 75% of their maximum intensity, a state we monitored via an arousal thermometer on the screen. To protect the university's equipment from the realities of the experiment, we had to wrap the laptops in plastic wrap. One can only imagine the thoughts of the students as they walked out of the lab, a plastic-wrapped laptop under one arm, heading to their dorm rooms to contribute to the advancement of science. The questions we asked them fell into 3 categories. The first measured sexual preferences. Did they find unusual things arousing? Would they enjoy sex with someone they hated? The second measured immoral behavior. Would they slip a woman a drug to have sex with her? Would they keep trying if she said no? The third measured safe sex practices. Would they use a condom even if they were afraid they would lose their erection? In the cold state, the responses were the picture of propriety. The students were respectful, rational, and moral. They indicated they would never drug a woman, they would always stop if asked, and they would certainly use protection. They had no interest in deviant sexual acts. Then came the hot state. The results were not just different, they were terrifying. The nice, polite Berkeley students vanished. In their place were strangers, men who were willing to take risks, ignore morals, and pursue gratification at almost any cost. In the cold state, only a tiny fraction of the students said they would consider slipping a woman a drug. In the hot state, that number skyrocketed by more than 400%. In the cold state, they unanimously agreed they would stop if a woman said no. In the hot state, a significant number admitted they might not. The preference for safe sex collapsed. The appeal of strange and even aggressive sexual acts doubled or tripled. The experiment revealed a profound truth. We are not one person. We are two. There is the cool, rational self that makes long-term plans and believes in high moral standards. And there is the hot, impulsive self that cares only for the immediate present. The tragedy is that the cool self does not know the hot self. When we are calm, we cannot predict how we will behave when the heat is turned on. We are strangers to ourselves. Safe sex. The implications of this ignorance are deadly, particularly when it comes to the spread of HIV and AIDS. For decades, the strategy of health organizations and parents has been to educate teenagers in the classroom, a quintessentially cold environment. We explain the risks, we show them charts, we get them to agree rationally that they will use condoms, and the teenagers are sincere when they agree. They aren't lying. But when they find themselves in the back seat of a car, the cold state is gone. The hot state takes over, and the rational agreements made in the classroom are irrelevant. The hot teenager doesn't care about a lecture they heard 3 weeks ago. They care about the immediate sensation. If we want to reduce unsafe sex, we cannot rely on rational planning alone. We must acknowledge the existence of the hot state. We need to design interventions that work during the arousal, or better yet, prevent the need for decision-making in that moment. Carrying a condom just in case is a strategy of the cold self. But unless that condom is easily accessible and the habit of using it is ingrained beyond thought, the hot self will likely discard it. We need to bridge the gap between what we think we will do and what we actually do. Safe driving. This phenomenon is not limited to sex. Consider the act of driving. We all think of ourselves as good, safe drivers. In our cold state, sitting in our living rooms, we would never dream of chasing another car down the highway or screaming obscenities at a stranger. But put us behind the wheel, add a little time pressure, and have someone cut us off. Suddenly, the pulse quickens. The adrenaline flows. The hot driver emerges. This version of us perceives the other driver not as a human being who made a mistake, but as a malicious enemy who must be punished. We take risks, tailgating, speeding, weaving, that our rational selves would find suicidal. And just like the students in the experiment, when the anger subsides and we cool down, we often look back at our behavior with disbelief. What was I thinking? We ask. The answer is, you weren't thinking, you were reacting. Better life decisions. The lesson of the plastic-wrapped laptops is that we must stop assuming that we are the same person across all emotional states. We are not. We are a confederation of different selves, and the self that makes the plan is rarely the self that has to execute it. To make better life decisions, we need to respect the power of the hot state. We need to intervene before the arousal hits. If you know that you overspend when you are hungry or excited, don't go shopping in that state. If you know that you will drive aggressively when you are late, build in a buffer of time so you are never late. If you know that you might make a mistake in the heat of passion, set up rules and barriers while you are still cold that will prevent you from crossing the line. We cannot suppress our instincts simply by wishing them away. We can, however, prepare for them. We can be like Odysseus, who knew that he would not be able to resist the Song of the Sirens. He didn't promise himself he would be strong. He ordered his men to tie him to the mast. He managed his hot self by making the decision while he was still cold. Appendix, Chapter 5. To give you a clearer picture of the magnitude of the shift, here are some of the specific questions we asked and the differences in the responses. We asked participants to rate the likelihood of engaging in these behaviors on a scale from 0 to 100. Can you imagine yourself being attracted to a 12-year-old girl? Cold state, high repulsion.
hot state, significant increase in attraction. Would you slip a woman a drug to increase the likelihood that she would have sex with you? Cold state, 5% probability. Hot state, 26% probability. Would you keep trying to have sex after your date says no? Cold state, near 0% probability. Hot state, markedly higher probability. Would you use a condom even if you were afraid you might lose your erection? Cold state, 80-90% said yes. Hot state, drop to below 50%. These numbers are not just statistics, they represent the gap between who we think we are and who we become. Recognizing this gap is the first step toward closing it. Chapter 6. The Problem of Procrastination and Self-Control. Why we can't make ourselves do what we want to do. In 2002, the Ford Motor Company offered a 0% financing deal on some of its cars. This was a fantastic offer. Buy a car and pay no interest on the loan. It was essentially free money. Yet, surprisingly, many customers turned it down. They opted instead to pay a significant amount of interest, sometimes thousands of dollars over the life of the loan, just to get a cash rebate of $1,000 up front. Why would rational people choose to lose money in the long run for a smaller immediate gain? The answer lies in the problem of procrastination and self-control. We have good intentions. We want to save for retirement, exercise regularly, and eat healthy foods. But when the moment of decision arrives, immediate gratification often wins. We buy the big TV now rather than saving for the future. We eat the cake now and promise to diet tomorrow. The Ford customers were afraid that if they didn't take the $1,000 rebate immediately, they would never see that money again. They didn't trust their future selves to save the monthly difference in payments. They chose the sure thing now over the better thing later because they knew deep down that they had a self-control problem. This struggle is as old as humanity, but I wanted to test how it plays out in a modern setting, specifically in my own classroom at MIT. I was teaching a course on decision-making to a group of bright, motivated students. The course required 3 main papers, which would account for a large portion of their final grade. I decided to run an experiment with 3 different classes to see how deadlines affected their performance. In the first class, I set a strict schedule. I gave them 3 specific deadlines for the papers, spaced evenly throughout the semester. If a paper was late, there would be a penalty, 1% off the grade for each day of delay. This was the dictatorial condition. The students had no choice. The external authority, me, imposed the structure. In the second class, I went to the opposite extreme. I told the students that there were no fixed deadlines during the semester. All 3 papers were due by the last day of class. They could turn them in early if they wanted, but there was no penalty as long as everything was in by the final lecture. This was the freedom condition. The students had complete autonomy. In the third class, I offered a compromise, a self-imposed deadline condition. On the first day of class, I told the students that they could set their own deadlines for the 3 papers. They had to commit to these dates immediately, and once set, the dates were final. Late submissions would be penalized just like in the first class. However, they were free to choose the last day of class for all 3 papers if they wished. According to standard economic theory, the students in the second and third classes should have performed the best. The second class had the most flexibility. They could turn in papers whenever they were ready. The third class also had flexibility, plus the option to create a structure if they wanted it. The first class, with the rigid deadlines, should have been the most constrained and therefore the least optimal. But humans are not rational economic agents. We are procrastinators. When the semester ended and the grades were tallied, the results were clear. The class with the dictatorial, externally imposed deadlines, Class 1, got the best grades. The class with complete freedom, Class 2, got the worst grades. The class with the self-imposed deadlines, Class 3, fell somewhere in the middle. The students in the freedom class, lacking any structure, fell victim to the student syndrome. They waited until the last possible moment to start their work, and the quality of their papers suffered immensely. Without deadlines to force them to space out their effort, they crammed everything into the final week, resulting in stress and poor performance. The students in the self-imposed class were interesting. Most of them recognized their tendency to procrastinate. They didn't choose the last day of class for all their papers. They spaced them out, creating their own commitment devices. Those who spaced their deadlines evenly performed almost as well as the dictatorial class. But not everyone did. Some students set deadlines that were too clustered at the end, and their grades dragged down the class average. This experiment teaches us a crucial lesson.
We have a self-control problem, but we also have the capacity to recognize it. When we are offered a tool to bind our future selves, like the ability to set binding deadlines, many of us will use it. We know we will fail if left to our own devices, so we appreciate the external structure. This principle applies far beyond the classroom. Consider healthcare. We all know we should go for regular checkups, but we put them off. The cost is immediate: time, discomfort, money, while the benefit is in the distant, abstract future. What if we applied the dictatorial model to healthcare? Imagine if you had to pay a deposit of $100 to your doctor at the beginning of the year. If you showed up for your scheduled checkup, you got the money back. If you procrastinated and missed it, you lost the money. My guess is that attendance rates would skyrocket. We need these external constraints to help us do what we know we should do. Or consider a more mundane example: car maintenance. We are supposed to change our oil every few thousand miles, but it is a hassle. We delay it, risking damage to our engines. Honda understood this psychology when they designed their service reminders. In modern Hondas, a light doesn't just suggest service. It counts down. It gives you a specific target. Service due in 500 miles. It turns a vague sometime into a concrete deadline, and because the car tracks it for you, the cognitive load is removed. You don't have to remember, you just have to obey the light. The same logic applies to savings. We find it incredibly hard to save money because spending is fun now and retirement is far away. But we can use pre-commitment tools. We can set up automatic deductions from our paychecks that go straight into a savings account or a 401k. By the time we see our net pay, the money is already gone. We don't have to exercise self-control every month. We only have to exercise it once when we sign up for the plan. We can also use emotional deadlines. If you want to get in shape, arrange to exercise with a friend. The social pressure, the fear of letting your friend down, acts as a commitment device. It forces you to show up when your own willpower might fail. Ultimately, the problem of procrastination is a battle between our cool, rational self and our hot, impulsive self. The cool self wants to be healthy, wealthy, and wise. The hot self wants cake, a new TV, and a nap. To win this battle, the cool self must be strategic. It must create an environment where the hot self cannot easily misbehave. It must sign the contract, set the deadline, and lock the door. We cannot rely on our strength of character alone. We need help, even if, or especially if, that help comes in the form of a strict rule we impose on ourselves. Healthcare. The issue of self-control is perhaps most critical in the realm of personal health. We are currently facing an epidemic of lifestyle-related diseases: obesity, diabetes, heart disease. These are largely problems of procrastination. We put off the diet, we put off the exercise, we put off the colonoscopy. We need to rethink how we structure medical compliance. The current system relies entirely on individual willpower, which we know is a finite and often failing resource. We could implement commitment contracts for health. For example, a patient could deposit money into an account that is only refunded if they meet certain health goals, like lowering their cholesterol or walking a certain number of steps a week. This turns the abstract, long-term reward of health into a concrete, immediate reward of getting my money back. We could also bundle unpleasant medical tasks with immediate rewards. This is what Mary Poppins meant by "a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down." If you dread going to the dentist, maybe you allow yourself to buy a new book or go to a movie only after the appointment. You link the pain to a pleasure, changing the immediate calculus of the decision. Savings. The American savings rate has plummeted in recent decades. This is a disaster in slow motion. We are a nation of spenders, fueled by a credit industry that makes it dangerously easy to satisfy our immediate desires at the expense of our future security. To fix this, we need to make saving the path of least resistance. Currently, spending is the default. You have to actively choose to save. We should flip this. This is the genius of the Save More Tomorrow program developed by Richard Thaler and Shlomo Benazzi. In this plan, employees agree now to increase their savings rate in the future whenever they get a raise. This works for two reasons. First, because the deduction happens in the future, the pain of losing that spending money feels less intense due to our tendency to discount the future. Second, because the increase is tied to a raise, the employee never sees their take-home pay go down. They just see it go up a little less than it would have. It bypasses the feeling of loss. These tools, deadlines, pre-commitments, defaults,
are the weapons we have against our own worst instincts. We are not perfectly rational machines. We are fallible, impulsive humans. But if we accept this reality, we can design our lives and our institutions to protect us from ourselves. Chapter 7. The High Price of Ownership. Why we overvalue what we have. At Duke University, basketball is not merely a sport. It is a religion. The stadium is small and the fan base is fervent, which creates a significant problem. The demand for tickets far outstrips the supply. To manage this, the university has developed a sophisticated and grueling selection process known as tenting. For weeks before the big games, students set up a shantytown of tents on the grass outside the stadium. They sleep there, eat there, and wait there. At random intervals, a siren sounds and the students must check in. If you miss a check-in, you are out. It is a test of endurance, dedication, and sleep deprivation. But even surviving this ordeal does not guarantee a ticket. It merely qualifies you for a lottery. After one such lottery, my colleague Zeev Karmon and I saw a perfect opportunity to study the psychology of ownership. We had a group of students who were identical in their desire for tickets. They had all camped out, they had all suffered, and they all wanted to go to the game. The only difference was that, thanks to the random lottery, some of them now owned a ticket and some of them did not. We contacted the students who had won tickets and asked them a simple question. How much would you sell your ticket for? We then contacted the students who had lost the lottery and asked them, how much would you be willing to pay for a ticket? Economic theory would suggest that the prices should be roughly similar. After all, the value of the game is the same. The student's passion is the same. The only difference is who happens to be holding the piece of paper. The results, however, showed a chasm of irrationality. The students who did not have a ticket were willing to pay, on average, about $170. This was a significant sum for a student, representing a deep desire to attend. But the students who did have a ticket, their average selling price was about $2,400. The gap was astronomical. The ticket owners demanded 14 times more than the buyers were willing to offer. Why? When we interviewed the students, the reason became clear. The buyers looked at the transaction and saw the loss of money. They thought about other things they could do with $170. Drinks at a bar, new clothes, textbooks. They saw the cost. The owners, however, looked at the transaction and saw the loss of the experience. They talked about the memory of the game, the feeling of being in the stadium, the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see their team win. To them, selling the ticket wasn't just a financial transaction, it was a loss of something they already possessed and cherished. This is the endowment effect. We value things more simply because we own them. Whether it is a basketball ticket, a car, or a house, the moment we take ownership, our perspective shifts. We start to focus on what we would lose by giving it up, rather than what we would gain. And because humans are loss-averse, because the pain of losing is psychologically about twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining, we attach an unreasonably high price to our possessions. There are three main quirks of human nature that drive this ownership bias. First, we fall in love with what we already have. It happens with cars. You buy a new car and suddenly you are washing it every week, admiring the shine and fussing over every speck of dust. You have bonded with it. It is no longer just a vehicle, it is your vehicle. Second, we focus on what we might lose rather than what we might gain. When we think about selling our house, we don't think about the money we will get to buy a new, potentially better house. We think about the memories we will leave behind, the height chart on the doorframe, the light in the kitchen, the garden we planted. We focus on the loss. Third, we assume that other people will see the transaction from our perspective. We expect the buyer of our house to appreciate the charm of the creaky floorboards and the character of the drafty windows just as much as we do. But they don't. They see noise and heating bills. They are looking at it through their own lens, not ours. Ownership is not just about material things. It applies to ideas as well. Once we take ownership of an opinion, whether it is about politics, sports, or which is the best operating system, we love it perhaps more than we should. We value our own ideas more than the ideas of others simply because they are ours. We become rigid. We interpret every new piece of information as confirmation of our own stance, and we dismiss anything that contradicts it. We become prisoners of our own intellectual property. The IKEA effect is another manifestation of this. There is a peculiar pride we feel in things we have built ourselves. A cheap, wobbly bookshelf that you spent 3 hours assembling with an Allen wrench is often more valuable to you than a high-quality piece of furniture you bought pre-assembled. Why? Because you put your labor into it. You own the effort and therefore you overvalue the result. Ownership also has a virtual component. Advertisers know this well. They try to make us feel like owners before we have even bought the product. This is why they offer trial periods. Try this mattress for 30 nights in your own home, they say. If you don't like it, send it back. They know that once the mattress is in your house, once you have slept on it and it has become part of your routine, the endowment effect kicks in. It becomes your mattress. The thought of sending it back feels like a loss. You are no longer evaluating whether to buy it. You are evaluating whether to give it up. And most of the time, we choose to keep it. The same applies to the money-back guarantee. It seems like a safety net for the consumer, but it is actually a trap. It lowers the barrier to entry, allowing us to take possession. And once we possess, we rarely let go. Auctions are another trap. When we place a bid on eBay, we start to imagine that we already own the item. We picture it in our house. We start to feel the virtual ownership. If someone outbids us, we don't just feel like we lost a chance to buy, we feel like we lost something that was already ours. So we bid again, higher this time, to reclaim our property. The auctioneer relies on this emotional shift to drive prices up. Is there a cure for the endowment effect? It is difficult. Ownership is a deep-seated human instinct, but we can try to view our transactions with a more detached eye. When you are buying something, try to imagine that you don't own the money you are about to spend, that it is just a tool to get what you want. When you are selling something, try to view the object as a stranger would see it, without the memories, without the emotional attachment. I have tried to apply this to my own life. When I look at my house, I try to see it not as a repository of my history, but as a collection of bricks and wood. I try to ask myself, if I didn't own this, how much would I pay to get it? It is a humbling exercise, and it often reveals that the things we treasure are not quite as valuable to the rest of the world as they are to us. Chapter 8. Keeping Doors Open. Why Options Distract Us from Our Main Objective. In 210 BC, a Chinese commander named Shang Yu led his troops across the Yangtze River to attack the army of the Qin dynasty. Upon landing, he did something that would be considered madness by most military strategists. He ordered his men to set fire to their own ships and smash their cooking pots. He left them with no way to retreat and no way to eat unless they defeated the enemy. His message was clear. There is no going back. We either win or we die. And they won. By eliminating their options, Shang Yu focused his army's attention entirely on the single task at hand: victory. Today, we do the exact opposite. We are obsessed with keeping our options open. We buy the SUV with four-wheel drive not because we go off-roading, but just in case we might want to someday. We buy the computer with the expandable memory just in case we need it. We double major in college just in case one career path doesn't work out. We date multiple people just in case one of them turns out to be the one. We believe that having more options is always better. We think it gives us freedom and security, but what if we are wrong? What if the very act of keeping so many doors open is actually closing the door to success? My colleague Jiwong Xin and I decided to test this hypothesis using a computer game. We created a game where players moved a little character around a screen that had 3 doors: a red door, a blue door, and a green door. When a player clicked on a door, they entered a room and could start clicking inside to earn money. Each click in a room would yield a random payoff, but each room had a different average payout. For example, the red room might pay an average of 3 cents per click, while the blue room might pay 5 cents. The player's goal was simple: make as much money as possible in 100 clicks. The optimal strategy was straightforward. The player should briefly sample each room to see which one paid the most, and then spend the rest of their clicks exclusively in that high-paying room. And that is exactly what the players did. They quickly identified the best room and stuck with it, maximizing their earnings. Then we introduced a twist. We changed the game so that if a player didn't click on a door for 12 consecutive turns, that door would disappear forever. It would shrink, fade, and vanish from the screen. Suddenly, the player's behavior changed completely. They could no longer bear to stay in the high-paying room. Every time a door was about to vanish, they would rush over and click on it once, just to reset the clock and keep it open. They would leave the room that was paying them 5 cents a click to go click on a door that paid only 3 cents, just so they wouldn't lose the option of the 3-cent room. The result? They made significantly less money. They were so busy running around keeping doors open that they failed to harvest the gold in the best room. They were driven not by the desire for profit, but by the fear of loss. They couldn't stand the idea of an option disappearing, even if that option was useless to them. This doorkeeping behavior is rampant in our lives.
We see it in the student who cannot decide between two majors and ends up taking a hodgepodge of classes that delay their graduation. We see it in the person who dates someone for years without committing, but also without breaking up, terrified to close the door on the relationship, but equally terrified to close the door on other potential partners. We see it in the political world, where leaders hesitate to make tough decisions, trying to keep everyone happy and every option on the table, only to end up with a watered-down compromise that pleases no one. The tragedy is that keeping doors open is not free. It comes at a cost. In our experiment, the cost was measured in cents. In life, it is measured in time, energy, and lost opportunities. Every minute you spend maintaining a friendship that has run its course is a minute you cannot spend deepening a friendship that matters. Every dollar you spend on a just-in-case feature is a dollar you cannot invest in something you actually use. We are like a donkey, standing between two identical piles of hay. Unable to decide which one is better, the donkey starves to death. We are so afraid of making the wrong choice that we make no choice at all, or we make a half-hearted choice that leaves us unsatisfied. Consider the story of a young man I knew who was torn between two girlfriends. One was an artist, creative and spontaneous. The other was a lawyer, stable and intellectual. He loved them both for different reasons. For months, he vacillated. He would spend a week with the artist, then panic that he was missing out on the stability of the lawyer. He would spend a week with the lawyer, then panic that he was missing the excitement of the artist. He was keeping his doors open. He thought he was preserving his options. In reality, he was slowly killing both relationships. By failing to commit to one, he was giving neither of them the attention they deserved. Eventually, both women got tired of his indecision and left him. By trying to keep both doors open, he ended up in the hallway, alone. We need to learn to close doors. We need to actively shut down options that are no longer serving us. We need to drop out of committees that waste our time. We need to stop sending holiday cards to people we haven't seen in a decade. We need to sell the clothes we never wear. We need to commit to a career path, a partner, a passion. It is painful to close a door. It feels like a loss. But it is a necessary loss. Only by closing the doors of distraction can we truly focus on the doors of opportunity. We must realize that the most dangerous door is not the one we accidentally close, but the one we leave open for no reason other than fear. What doors are you keeping open right now, and what is it costing you? Chapter 9. The Effect of Expectations. Why the Mind Gets What It Expects. A few years ago, the Philadelphia Eagles played the New York Giants. It was a fierce game, but the real battle happened after the whistle blew. In a bar near Philadelphia, I found myself sitting between two passionate fans, one rooting for the Eagles, the other for the Giants. They had both watched the exact same game. They had seen the same plays, the same fouls, the same touchdowns. Yet, when they began to discuss the officiating, it was as if they had been in different universes. The Eagles fan was convinced that the referees had been bribed by New York. He cited specific plays where his team was robbed. The Giants fan was equally incensed, arguing that the referees were clearly biased toward Philadelphia. How could two people see the same event so differently? The answer lies in the power of expectations. We do not see the world as it is. We see it as we expect it to be. Our pre-existing beliefs, our loyalties, and our hopes act as a filter, reshaping reality before it even reaches our conscious mind. To understand this phenomenon more scientifically, my colleagues and I decided to run an experiment, not with football, but with beer. We set up a small pub at the MIT Media Lab. We offered students 2 small cups of beer to taste. One was a standard commercial brew, Budweiser. The other was the MIT brew, which was actually Budweiser spiked with a few drops of balsamic vinegar. Now, balsamic vinegar in beer sounds terrible. But in small quantities, it actually adds a tangy, sophisticated note that many people enjoy. We divided the students into 3 groups. The first group was the blind group. We didn't tell them what was in the beers. We just labeled them Beer A and Beer B. They tasted both and then chose which one they wanted a full pint of. In this blind test, the majority of students actually preferred the balsamic vinegar brew. The vinegar gave it a complexity they liked. The second group was the informed group. We told them up front, Beer A is Budweiser, Beer B is Budweiser with balsamic vinegar. Then they tasted them. The result? They hated the vinegar beer. The moment they heard vinegar, their faces scrunched up in anticipation of disgust. Their expectation that vinegar and beer don't mix overpowered their actual sensory experience. They overwhelmingly chose the plain Budweiser.
The third group was the most interesting. We called them the after group. We gave them the beers to taste without telling them what they were. They tasted them, and like the blind group, many liked the vinegar beer. After they had tasted and made their choice, we told them the secret ingredient. Did the knowledge change their opinion retrospectively? No. Most of them still said they preferred the vinegar beer. They had already experienced the taste without prejudice, so the knowledge couldn't overwrite the sensory reality. This experiment proves that expectations don't just influence our judgment after the fact, they actually change the experience itself while it is happening. If you expect something to taste bad, your brain will actually process the signals from your taste buds differently. You will taste the badness that isn't there. This principle applies to far more than just food and drink. It shapes how we view everything from art to politics. Consider the case of Joshua Bell, one of the world's greatest violinists. In a famous experiment arranged by the Washington Post, Bell stood in a subway station in Washington, D.C., wearing jeans and a baseball cap. He opened his case and began to play some of the most intricate and beautiful pieces ever written on a violin worth $3.5 million. Thousands of people walked past him. Hardly anyone stopped. People threw a few coins into his case, treating him like a standard busker. He made about $32 in 45 minutes. A few days earlier, Bell had sold out a concert hall in Boston where seats cost $100. The music was the same. The violinist was the same. The only difference was the context and the expectation. In the concert hall, people expected greatness, so they heard greatness. In the subway, they expected a beggar, so they heard nothing special. We see this in the medical world as well. The placebo effect is essentially the power of expectation. If a doctor tells you that a pill will cure your pain, your brain releases its own natural painkillers, endorphins, to make that expectation come true. The pill might be sugar, but the relief is real. My colleagues and I tested whether the price of a medicine could influence its effectiveness. We gathered a group of volunteers and gave them a series of painful electric shocks to measure their pain tolerance. Then, we gave them a painkiller. For half the group, we told them the drug was a newly approved, high-priced medication costing $2.50 per pill. For the other half, we gave them the exact same pill, but told them it was a discounted generic version costing only 10 cents. The results were staggering. The people who took the expensive pill reported significantly more pain relief than those who took the cheap pill. The drug was identical. In fact, it was just vitamin C. But the price tag set an expectation of potency. You get what you pay for is such a deeply held belief that it alters our biological response to pain. Stereotypes are another form of expectation. They are categories we use to predict behavior, but they can become self-fulfilling prophecies. In one study, we asked Asian American women to take a math test. Before the test, we asked half of them questions related to their gender, e.g., do you live in a co-ed dorm? We asked the other half questions related to their heritage, e.g., what languages do you speak at home? We know that there are two conflicting stereotypes. Women are bad at math, and Asians are good at math. The women who were primed to think about their gender performed worse on the test. The women who were primed to think about their Asian heritage performed better. They were the same women with the same math skills, but the expectation triggered by the questions shifted their performance up or down. This is the danger of expectations. If we expect a certain group of people to be lazy or smart or aggressive, we will interpret their actions through that lens. If a child is told they are gifted, they will often rise to the occasion. If they are told they are troublemakers, they will often fall to it. So what can we do? We cannot eliminate expectations. They are part of how our brains organize the world, but we can be aware of them. When you are in a disagreement, try to strip away the labels. Try to look at the facts as a neutral observer would. If you are trying to sell an idea, remember that presentation matters. The plating of the food changes the taste. The setting of the concert changes the music. And if you want to enjoy a good beer, maybe don't ask what's in it until after you've taken a sip. Chapter 10. The Power of Price. Why a 50-cent aspirin can do what a penny aspirin can't. In the 1950s, a new surgical procedure swept through the medical world, offering hope to thousands of patients suffering from angina pectoris, a debilitating condition characterized by crushing chest pain due to reduced blood flow to the heart. The procedure was called internal mammary artery ligation. The theory was simple and elegant. By tying off the internal mammary arteries, which supplied blood to the chest wall, the body would be forced to sprout new channels to feed the heart muscle, thereby relieving the pain. It was a smash hit. Patients who underwent the surgery reported immediate and miraculous relief. They could walk without pain. They could return to work. They could breathe again. The medical community was thrilled. But there was one cardiologist in Seattle, Dr. Leonard Cobb, who was skeptical. He wondered if the improvement was truly physiological or if something else was at play. To find out, Dr. Cobb designed an experiment that would be ethically impossible today. He found a group of patients suffering from severe angina and divided them into two groups. The first group received the standard internal mammary artery ligation. The second group received a sham surgery. Dr. Cobb made the incisions on their chests so they would have the scars to prove they had been operated on. But he did not tie off the arteries, he simply sewed them back up. The results were a bombshell. The patients who received the fake surgery reported the exact same level of relief as those who received the real one. The improvement wasn't caused by redirected blood flow, it was caused by the power of belief. The patients believed they had been cured and their bodies responded by shutting down the pain signals. This was the placebo effect in its most dramatic form. The word placebo comes from the Latin for "I shall please." For centuries it was a staple of medicine, often because doctors had little else to offer. They prescribed lizard blood, crushed vipers, and powdered mummy, and often their patients got better. We like to think we have moved beyond such superstition, but the mechanism remains deeply embedded in our biology. We know that when a patient expects a drug to work, their brain releases endogenous opioids, natural painkillers that actually dampen the transmission of pain signals. The mind tells the body to heal, and the body obeys. But what triggers this expectation? One of the most powerful signals, it turns out, is price. We are conditioned to believe that quality comes at a cost. "You get what you pay for" is a maxim we apply to everything from cars to wine. Does it also apply to our own biology? My colleague, Rebecca Weber, and I decided to test this with a new painkiller we called Velladone RX. We gathered a group of volunteers at the MIT Media Lab and hooked them up to a machine that delivered calibrated electric shocks. First, we determined their pain threshold, the point at which the shock became unbearable. Then we gave them a brochure about Velladone RX. The literature described it as an exciting new drug from the Velladone family, known for its rapid and potent analgesic effects. In reality, the capsule contained nothing more than vitamin C. We divided the volunteers into two groups. The first group was told that the drug was expensive, $2.50 per dose. The second group was told that the drug was heavily discounted, only 10 cents per dose. After the participants took their respective pills and waited 15 minutes for them to kick in, we administered the shocks again. The results were staggering. In the group that took the expensive pill, nearly all the participants reported significant pain relief. They could tolerate much stronger shocks than before. They believed they had taken a potent medicine and their physiology responded accordingly. In the group that took the discounted pill, the results were dismal. Only half of them reported any pain relief. The other half felt the shocks just as acutely as they had before. The drug was identical. The brochure was identical. The only difference was the price tag. By discounting the price, we had discounted the placebo effect. We had cheapened their belief, and in doing so, we had robbed them of the relief they could have had. This phenomenon has profound implications for the medical industry. We often complain about the high cost of pharmaceuticals, and rightly so, but we must also consider the possibility that these high prices are part of the cure. If we were to strip away the branding, the marketing, and the expense, would the drugs still work as well? In the real world, this plays out in the battle between brand-name drugs and generics. Chemically, they are indistinguishable, but psychologically, they are worlds apart. People consistently report that the brand-name aspirin works better than the store brand. They feel that the expensive antidepressant lifts their mood more effectively than the generic alternative. This isn't just snobbery, it is a measurable biological response driven by the context of value. The influence of price on our experience is not limited to medicine. It pervades our consumption of everything. In blind taste tests, people often cannot distinguish between a $15 bottle of wine and a $100 bottle. But if you tell them the price before they taste it, the $100 bottle will trigger more activity in the pleasure centers of the brain. The expectation of quality, signaled by the price, actually changes the neural experience of the taste. We see the same thing with energy drinks. In another experiment, we sold SoBe Adrenaline Rush to students at the gym. Some paid full price,
Others bought it at a discount. We then asked them to solve a series of puzzles. The students who paid full price solved significantly more puzzles than those who bought the discounted drink. They expected the adrenaline rush to make them sharper, so it did. The students who bought the cheap drink thought, well, it's on sale, so it probably isn't that good, and their performance slumped. This leaves us with a difficult ethical dilemma. If a doctor knows that a more expensive placebo will actually help a patient more than a cheap one, is he obligated to prescribe the expensive one? Is it lying to the patient, or is it maximizing their well-being? We cannot simply wish away the placebo effect. It is a fundamental part of how our brains interact with the world. But we can become more aware of how we are being manipulated. When you reach for the $50 face cream instead of the $10 one, ask yourself, am I paying for better ingredients, or am I paying for the expectation that I will look better? Often, the only active ingredient that differentiates the two is the price itself. Chapter 11. The Context of Our Character, Part 1. Why we are dishonest and what we can do about it. In 2001, the world watched in stunned disbelief as the energy giant Enron collapsed in a spectacular fireball of fraud and deceit. It was a corporate tragedy that wiped out the retirement savings of thousands of employees and shook the foundations of the American economy. In the aftermath, the prevailing narrative was one of bad apples. The assumption was that a few evil, greedy executives, Ken Lay, Jeff Skilling, Andrew Fastow, had corrupted the system. If we could just root out these corrupt individuals, the logic went, the system would be safe. But I began to wonder if this bad apple theory was too convenient. Is dishonesty really the province of a few sociopathic individuals, or is it something far more common, something that lurks within all of us? To understand the nature of dishonesty, we must first look at the standard economic view of crime. This view is largely based on the work of the Nobel laureate Gary Becker, who suggested that criminals are rational calculators. According to this simple model of rational crime, SMRC, a person contemplating a crime weighs three factors: the expected gain from the crime, the probability of getting caught, and the severity of the punishment. If the benefit outweighs the cost, they commit the crime. It is a cold, amoral calculation. If the SMRC is true, then the way to stop crime is simple. Increase the police force to raise the probability of being caught, or increase prison sentences to raise the cost of punishment. I decided to test this rational model with a simple experiment. We visited several university campuses, including Harvard and MIT, and gave students a sheet of paper containing 20 different matrices. Each matrix consisted of 12 numbers. The task was to find two numbers in each matrix that added up to exactly 10. It was a simple arithmetic task, but it was time-consuming. We gave them 5 minutes to solve as many as they could. In the control condition, the students finished the task, handed their papers to the experimenter, who checked their answers, and paid them 50 cents for each correct solution. On average, the students solved 4 matrices. Then we introduced the shredder condition. In this version, the students finished the task, counted their own correct answers, and then walked to a shredder in the corner of the room. They shredded their worksheet, destroying the evidence, and then simply told the experimenter how many they had solved. The experimenter paid them based solely on their word. If the students were perfectly honest, the average score should have remained at 4, but it didn't. In the shredder condition, the average score jumped to 6. The increase was not due to a few students claiming they had solved all 20. We didn't see a sudden spike of super cheaters. Instead, we saw a shift in the entire bell curve. Almost everyone cheated, but they cheated just a little bit. They claimed to have solved 6 problems when they had really solved 4. They stole 2 distinct units of profit, $1 worth of dishonesty. This result challenged the SMORC model. If people were rational maximizers, why stop at 6? Why not claim 20? The risk of getting caught was 0 in the shredder condition. If they were going to lie, why not lie big? We decided to push the boundaries. We varied the amount of money. We offered $1 per question, then $2, then $5, and finally $10 per correct answer. According to standard economics, as the reward increases, the cheating should increase. The benefit side of the equation is getting heavier. But that is not what happened. The amount of cheating remained constant across all payment levels. In fact, at the highest level, $10 per problem, cheating actually decreased slightly. Why? Because it is much harder to tell yourself that you are an honest person when you are stealing $100 than when you are stealing a few quarters. We also varied the probability of getting caught. We made it even easier to cheat. In one condition, the students didn't even have to report their score to the experimenter. They just took the money they earned from a bowl of cash sitting on a desk. The level of supervision was non-existent. Yet the cheating did not increase. These experiments led me to a different theory of dishonesty. We are not rational calculators of risk and reward. We are torn between two competing motivations. On one hand, we want to benefit from cheating. We want the money. On the other hand, we want to view ourselves as honest, wonderful people. We reconcile these two conflicting desires through a mechanism I call the fudge factor. We cheat up to the level where we can still look at ourselves in the mirror and say, I am a good person. We don't steal $1,000 from the petty cash box because that would make us thieves. But we might take a red pen from the supply closet. We rationalize it. I did some work at home, or the company owes me. We reframe the act so that it doesn't impact our self-image. This brings us to a critical question. If we cheat because we can rationalize it, how can we stop it? The answer lies in reminding people of their own moral standards before they have the chance to cheat. We return to the Matrix experiment with a new twist. Before the students started the math task, we asked one group to write down the names of 10 books they had read in high school. We asked the second group to write down the 10 commandments. The group that recalled the books performed normally. They cheated the usual amount when given the chance to shred their papers. But the group that tried to recall the 10 commandments? They didn't cheat at all. It didn't matter that most of them couldn't remember all 10 commandments. Some remembered 3, some remembered "thou shalt not kill," and got stuck. But the mere act of contemplating a moral benchmark was enough to suppress the dishonesty entirely. The fudge factor vanished. The reminder of a higher code forced them to be honest. We saw a similar effect with honor codes. We asked students at MIT and Yale to sign a statement before the test. I understand that this experiment falls under the guidelines of the University Honor Code. Neither MIT nor Yale actually has an honor code, yet the students who signed the statement did not cheat. The act of signing, of pledging oneself to a standard of integrity, was a powerful commitment device. This suggests that society's attempts to curb dishonesty are often misguided. We focus on enforcement and punishment, assuming criminals are making a calculation. But for the vast majority of little cheaters, which includes most of us, the calculation is internal. It is about self-regard. The solution, therefore, is not more cameras or more police, but more reminders of the moral standards we claim to hold dear. We need to bring morality out of the background and place it directly in the path of temptation. Appendix, Chapter 11, The 10 Commandments. The effectiveness of the 10 Commandments in our experiment raises an interesting question about the role of religion and secular ethics in society. We often debate whether religious people are more moral than atheists. Our data suggests that the specific content of the faith might matter less than the saliency of the moral standard at the moment of decision. When we repeated the experiment with a group of self-declared atheists asking them to swear on a Bible, they also stopped cheating completely. They didn't believe in the Bible, but they understood the cultural weight of the oath. The ritual itself triggered their desire to be honorable. This implies that professional oaths, like the Hippocratic Oath for doctors or the Bar Oath for lawyers, could be powerful tools if they were used correctly. The problem is timing. A doctor takes the oath once, upon graduation, and then practices for 40 years without ever reciting it again. Our research shows that the effect of a moral reminder is short-lived. It works in the moment, but it fades. If we want to reduce dishonesty in the corporate world, we shouldn't just have employees sign a code of conduct on their first day of work. We should have them sign a statement of integrity at the top of every expense report, every tax return, and every audit. We need to reset the moral compass at the exact moment the ship is likely to drift off course. Chapter 12. The Context of Our Character, Part 2. Why dealing with cash makes us more honest. We have established that people cheat. We cheat a little bit, just enough to profit, but not so much that we feel like criminals. We have also seen that moral reminders can temporarily suppress this urge. But there is another factor that dramatically influences our honesty, one that is becoming increasingly relevant in our modern cashless society: the distance from money. To explore this, I returned to the MIT dorms. I placed a 6-pack of Coca-Cola in the communal refrigerators of several dorms. I also placed a plate containing 6 $1 bills in other refrigerators. Now, from a purely economic standpoint, 6 cans of Coke and $6 are roughly equivalent in value. If students are rational thieves, they should steal both with equal frequency. In fact, cash is arguably more desirable because it is more liquid. You can buy anything with it, not just soda.
But when I returned 72 hours later, the results were starkly different. The 6 packs of Coke were gone. Every single one had vanished. The students had no qualms about taking a beverage that wasn't theirs. The plates of cash, however, were untouched. Not a single bill had been taken. Why? Why is it that a student who would never dream of stealing $1 from a roommate's wallet feels perfectly comfortable stealing their roommate's soda? Why is taking a pencil from the office supply cabinet considered perks, while taking 10 cents from the petty cash box is considered theft? The answer is that the further we are removed from actual cash, the easier it is to rationalize our dishonesty. Cash is a psychological anchor. It feels real. It feels serious. Stealing money triggers a sharp moral alarm in our brains. It screams, "This is wrong. This is theft." But when we deal with non-monetary objects, stocks, expense reports, tokens, or digital credits, that alarm is muffled. We can tell ourselves stories. I'm not stealing. I'm just taking a few extra office supplies. I'm not defrauding the company. I'm just adding a few miles to my travel expense because they underpay me anyway. The abstraction allows us to bypass our conscience. To test this scientifically, I went back to the matrix experiment. We had 3 groups this time. Group 1, the control group. They solved the math problems, handed in their papers and got paid in cash. Group 2, the shredder group. They shredded their papers and told us how many they solved, getting paid in cash. As expected, they cheated a little bit. Group 3, the token group. In this condition, the students shredded their papers and reported their score. But instead of giving them cash immediately, we gave them plastic poker chips. They then had to walk 12 feet across the room to a different table to exchange those chips for cash. This seems like a trivial difference. A poker chip is just a placeholder for money. It is one step removed, but that one step was catastrophic for honesty. In the cash condition, cheating happened, but it was moderate. In the token condition, cheating exploded. The students in the token group cheated twice as much as those in the cash group. Some even claimed to have solved every single problem, a statistical impossibility. The moment the transaction was separated from cold, hard cash, the moral restraints collapsed. The students didn't feel like they were stealing money, they were just collecting plastic chips. The exchange for cash happened later, in a separate transaction that felt legitimate. This has terrifying implications for our financial system. We are moving rapidly toward a cashless society. We use credit cards, stock options, derivatives, and cryptocurrencies. We are adding layer upon layer of abstraction between us and the actual value. Consider the Enron scandal again. It is highly unlikely that the executives at Enron would have broken into the accounts of their employees and stolen rolls of cash. That would have felt visceral and wrong, but manipulating spreadsheets, revaluing assets, moving debt to off-balance sheet entities, that feels like a game. It feels like strategy, not robbery. The abstraction allowed them to destroy billions of dollars of wealth without ever feeling like common thieves. We see this in insurance fraud. A person who would return a lost wallet will happily inflate an insurance claim for a damaged roof. The insurance company has plenty of money, they rationalize, and I've paid my premiums for years. Because they aren't reaching into a person's pocket, they feel no guilt. We see it in expense report padding. A business traveler might expense a $100 dinner when they only spent $60. They wouldn't take $40 from the corporate vault, but rounding up on a piece of paper feels different. The danger is that as money becomes more digital and less tangible, our intuition about theft will weaken. We are building a financial world that maximizes our ability to rationalize dishonesty. If a plastic poker chip can double the rate of cheating in a controlled experiment, what does a complex financial derivative do to the moral compass of a trader? We must recognize that our honesty is not a fixed trait. It is situational, and it is heavily influenced by the medium of exchange. If we want to preserve integrity in a digital age, we need to find ways to make the moral cost of non-monetary theft just as visceral as stealing a dollar bill. We need to remind people that moving numbers on a screen is real, with real consequences for real people. Otherwise, we risk creating a world where everyone is a thief, and no one feels guilty. Chapter 13. Beer and Free Lunches. What is behavioral economics, and where are the free lunches? We began this journey by questioning the assumption that humans are rational agents. Standard economics, the bedrock of much of our public policy and business strategy, assumes that we are like Superman, capable, logical, and able to calculate the best possible outcome for ourselves in any situation. But over the course of these chapters, we have seen that we are actually much more like Homer Simpson. We are emotional, impulsive, easily confused, and often irrational. However, there is a silver lining. We are not irrational in a random, chaotic way. We are predictably irrational. Our mistakes follow patterns. We consistently overvalue what we own. We consistently procrastinate. We consistently get swayed by the word free. Because these errors are systematic, they are also manageable. This brings us to the concept of free lunches. In standard economics, there is a famous saying, "There is no such thing as a free lunch." This means that if there were an opportunity to get something for nothing, to increase efficiency or value without cost, someone would have already found it and exploited it. Therefore, the market is always efficient, and we're always doing the best we can. Behavioral economics begs to differ. If we are making systematic mistakes, if we are leaving value on the table because of our psychological quirks, then there are free lunches. There are opportunities to improve our lives and our institutions by designing them to account for our human fallibility. Let's return to the bar. Imagine you are out with 3 friends. The waiter comes over to take your drink orders. In standard economics, each person would order the beer they like best. If you like an IPA, you order an IPA. If your friend likes a stout, they order a stout. The fact that I ordered first shouldn't change what you want, but my colleague Jonathan Levav and I suspected otherwise. We went to a brewery in North Carolina and offered free beer samples to tables of patrons. We had 2 conditions. In one, the patrons ordered out loud, in sequence, just like in a normal bar. In the other, they wrote their orders down privately on a slip of paper, so no one knew what the others were choosing. The results were fascinating. When people ordered out loud, there was a huge variety of beers chosen at each table. People seemed to be intentionally picking something different from their friends. Why? Because in our culture, there is a social norm, need for uniqueness, that says we should be individuals. If you order the amber ale, and I also want the amber ale, I might feel pressure to order the stout instead just to show that I'm not copying you. The tragedy is that the people who switched their orders to be unique ended up enjoying their beer less. They sacrificed their personal pleasure for the sake of their public image. The only person who was truly happy was the first person to order. They got what they wanted without constraint. However, this isn't universal. When we ran the same experiment in Hong Kong, we found the opposite effect. In a culture that values collectivism and harmony, people felt pressure to order the same thing as their peers. If the first person ordered a lager, the others were more likely to order a lager too. But just like the Americans, these conformist drinkers also enjoyed their beer less than those who ordered privately. They sacrificed their preference for the sake of belonging. This simple experiment illustrates the core promise of behavioral economics. The standard model says, people know what they want. The behavioral model says, people think they know what they want, but the environment influences them in ways they don't realize. So where is the free lunch? It's in the menu design. If a restaurant owner knows this, they can change the system. They could have patrons write down their orders, like in a sushi restaurant, or order via an app. By removing the public pressure, they would ensure that every customer gets the beer they actually like best. The cost of implementation is 0. The increase in customer satisfaction is significant. That is a free lunch. This logic applies to much larger problems than beer. Consider retirement savings. We know people don't save enough because they procrastinate. Chapter 6. The free lunch solution is to change the default. Instead of asking people to sign up for a 401k, we automatically sign them up and give them the option to opt out. Suddenly, savings rates skyrocket. We haven't spent a dime. We've just used our knowledge of human nature to design a better system. Consider healthcare. We know people struggle to take their medication. We could design pill bottles that glow when it's time to take a dose, or financial incentives that reward compliance. Consider honesty. We know that people cheat more when they are removed from cash, Chapter 12, and when they lack moral reminders, Chapter 11. We can design corporate forms that ask for a signature at the top rather than the bottom, triggering honesty before the temptation begins. We are standing on the edge of a new understanding of human behavior. For too long, we have built our world for the rational, cold, calculating Homo economicus. But that person doesn't exist. We are Homo sapiens, messy, emotional, and flawed. If we accept this, if we accept that we are predictably irrational, we can stop shouting at people to be more logical and start building a world that works for who we actually are. We can design tools, policies, and environments that help us overcome our limitations. We can use the very forces that lead us astray to guide us back to the right path. The free lunches are out there. We just have to be willing to look for them.